Okay, so welcome everyone. You are watching Weaving Women's Voices in Southeast Asia. Um, First webinar entitled VAW in the Economy, an introspection on the everyday lives of women and girls during COVID-19. By the way, I'm Jelen Paclarin. I'm from the Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau. Um, for this afternoon, we know that there are already a couple of discussions on women and COVID-19. Um, it took us a while for Weave to come out with its own webinar because we asked our co-panelists, can I ask you to mute your microphone because it creates echo? It took us a while to come out with this webinar because we asked our panelists to gather stories from the ground and document our own experiences and expectations of marginalized groups of women and girls. So after this webinar, we will come out with its own paper documenting our experiences and share with other Southeast Asian countries the perspectives on how we as a group and our partners, particularly the community, struggle, negotiate as marginalized women and girls. So I would like to call on my co-facilitator, Mirna. We will be co-facilitating this webinar this afternoon.
Thank you, Jelen, and good afternoon, guests and viewers. I am Mirna Dominguez of the Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau. Again, welcome to our regional discussion on the violence against women and the economy, where we would like to amplify the often unheard voices of marginalized women and communities during COVID-19 pandemic. This feminist discussion is organized and brought to you by Weaving Women's Voices in Southeast Asia, or WIV. WIV is a feminist regional network of women's organizations and advocates working at the national level in 6 countries such as Brunei Darussalam, Burma, Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. WIV focuses on 3 thematic areas. These are culture of impunity, sexual violence, and economic justice. So to briefly explain what this webinar is all about, I would like to give back the space to my co-facilitator, the Executive Director of Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau, no other than Ms. Jelen Paclarin. Jelen?
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mirna. So, since most of the Weave members are present in Southeast Asia, we would like to look into how each country in the region tried to address COVID in relation to women's issues. Um, can you please help me, Shai, with the first slide? If you will So this particular, I would like to show you the data that has been gathered by ASEAN. This came from the ASEAN website, which actually provides us what is the situation of COVID-19 in the region. So the ASEAN website provide an update for ASEAN health sector's efforts on COVID-19. However, if you're going to look at the data, it's on a per country basis. So you will see that all the 10 ASEAN member states have actually put on this particular graph the reported cases, no, or confirmed cases of COVID-19. But as you see, the common challenge that we experience, it's not, the data is general, it's not disaggregated. So we do not really see who are the women, who are the men, who are the marginalized, who are the poor people, who are the women with disability, and how women are affected disproportionately in this context. You will also see that when we try to look at the website of ASEAN, it would appear that there is no clear analysis on how the data or this data affects the region, affects ASEAN member states at the regional context. So we are hoping that in this discussion, you will see a glimpse of how various countries experience COVID-19 and how the invisibility of women can be shown in this particular discussion. So in times of crisis, government should not look at, as I've said, the invisibility of women's issues, should not look at their issues of women's issues and concerns and needs of women and girls as trivial and less important during this pandemic. Women experience heightened stress over their multiple burden and daily survival and increased vulnerability to violence during COVID-19. However, their issues continue to be invisible such that response says fail to include their distinct needs. For example, the lack of dignity kits in relief packages and the lack of referral mechanism and effective response for victims of violence in the context of this pandemic. Moreover, this crisis has paved for more consolidation of power by authoritarian leadership with its crackdown on human rights advocates and those who express their dissent. It would appear that there is a seeming increase of securitization or militaristic response of most government countries in Southeast Asia. It is imperative to examine how ASEAN's vision of regional economic integration through the ASEAN Economic Community has supported the workers and the marginalized who significantly contributed to the economy. The ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint 2025 pushes for a more resilient, inclusive, and people-oriented, people-centered community integrated with the global economy. The push for gender equality remains far from being realized. Government and societies have superficially carried the banner by remaining to be gender neutral and gender blind, especially when a crisis arises. So the invisibility of issues of women and girl children and their marginalized and the marginalization continues. And this is why we in Weave and the wanted to come up with this discussion, no? And try to cover the following objectives. Number one, we wanted to expose and discuss the socio-economic impacts, whether common or distinct, faced by marginalized communities in Southeast Asia, with focus on women and girl children in various sectors. Number two, we wanted to examine the gender neutrality or gender blindness in the responses of governments, including ASEAN, in handling the pandemic, especially in relation to women and girl children situation. And then lastly, provide recommendations and possible ways forward to address the plight of marginalized women and girl children, especially in times of crisis, not only at the national but at the regional level. So here, we hope to address these objectives in our 2-hour discussion. Mirna?
Thank you, Dylan. Our panel speakers for this regional discussion are 5 feminists from Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, Brunei Darussalam, and Burma. And to know more about our panelist speakers, may we request each one of them to introduce themselves and their organization briefly. So let's start with Thailand.
Good afternoon. My name is Usa Lersi Sanhat. Yeah, I'm the program director of the Foundation for Women. We have been working on the violence against women, and also after the COVID-19, we have been get contact from the women from the network of the women groups in the local communities, and we also advocate for the program on the women's human rights of the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Usa. So let's call in Indonesia.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Rena Herdiani. I'm the Vice Chairperson for organization at Kalyana Mitra. Kalyana Mitra is a feminist organization established since 1985, based in Jakarta. And we have been doing women community development in rural and also in urban poor area. And we're doing also gender awareness raising through critical education and public campaign, and also advocacy on gender perspective policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Renan. Welcome. And let's proceed to the Philippines.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Liz Collin from the Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau, a feminist organization in the Philippines that advocates for women's human rights and the law, especially on violence against women. And we do research, policy advocacy, and grassroots capacity building, particularly among marginalized women and girls.
Thank you, Liz. And let's call Brunei Darussalam.
Judy, Mike. Judy, Mike.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Ms. Nur Judy Abdullah. I'm the founder and executive director of Project Women and Girls Development. It is a not-for-profit social enterprise committed to raise awareness on women and girls' development in all areas of their lives. We aim to develop, maintain, and nurture partnerships with institutions, organizations, networks, and individuals who identify with our vision and mission. We help promote women and girls' development through education and lifelong learning to enable them to realize their full potential, exercise their human rights, help bridge gender gap, and contribute meaningfully to the society. We also create open spaces for women and girls to gather and discuss issues and challenges that affect them, advocate for solutions together, counsel and motivate each other in a supportive and safe environment. And we also expand opportunities for increased economic participation of women and girls to generate sustainable income through entrepreneurship or gainful self-employment by leveraging on digital technology.
Thank you, Nur Judy. So the last but not the least, let's call Burma.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nosasan from Women's League of Burma. I'm working with Women's League of Burma as a general secretary. Women's League of Burma compares with the ethnic women's organization that we mostly operate in ethnic area, especially conflict and post-conflict areas. So we mostly focus on the women's political empowerment, peace and reconciliation, and violence against women to operate and promote and protect the women and the girls in the ethnic area. So we happy to join the webinar today to share about the situation in Burma right now. According to the COVID-19, that's many problems happen in Burma right now. Next to see all.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for allotting your time for this regional discussion this afternoon. So we may now proceed to our first panel. For our first panel, we have our three resource speakers from Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. To facilitate this panel, I will give back the space to the facilitator, Dylan.
Hello. Yes, hello again. We would like to greet our viewers watching on YouTube. We're live, so please feel free to send in your comments, your analysis, questions, and we will try to read it during the open forum. So for our first panel, we will be focusing on as mentioned earlier, we will have three panelists, no? So our first panel, we will have three panelists from Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines. So for Thailand, we will be asking Isa to elaborate further on the interrelationship of mental health with VAW, and how mental health of women is interconnected with violence against women. Is there an interrelationship? And then next, Usa will be followed by Rena from Indonesia. Rena will focus more on how women and girl children are becoming more invisible, no, during this pandemic, and how women and girl children's invisibility interrelates with economic policies if there is an interconnection. Last but not the least, we will have Liz from the Philippines, who are representing Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau, who will look further on the interrelationship of VAW and the economy, and why despite the seeming non-reference of economists on VAW, women's human rights organizations like WIV see the uh, value added and importance of interconnecting VAW and the economy. So let us hear first our from our first panelist, Usa from Thailand.
Thank you, Jalen. Yeah, I would like to say that the pandemic, the coronavirus, maybe not discriminate anyone. You will see that um, every people at different age also affected from the virus, and also people from different occupation also have affected from this. Right, according to the statistic by the health ministry, you will see that the number of the affected people in Thailand is not high, and also maybe it's about 3,000, yeah, and 18. And yeah, according to this number, we will see that you see that maybe you see from the slide, yeah. The youngest is the 1 month old baby, and also the eldest is the 97 years old, yeah. And the average is 40 years, yeah. And then we look to the next slide, yeah. We will see that the number of the men that got the virus is more than women. But from us looking at this, we will see that we cannot say that the pandemic affects to men more than women, because actually we have to look at also the indirect impact to the woman and also to the life of the people in the society. And we also know that after the pandemic, the government also deliver many of the measures, and especially the lockdown. And the lockdown has been affected to people in the society, especially the people who are working in the service sectors. And from this, we will see that a large number of the people, including women, that get affected from these the measures. And actually, like Jelen already mentioned, that women are the one who taking care of the people in the family. When people get sick, it's women who are the one who have to take care. And now, from the lockdown measures, the government closed down many of the daycare center. This is only one example that if the daycare stop taking care of the children, it's the woman who has to taking care. And during these measures, some of the people can work at home, but you see that the women in informal sectors, many of them cannot stay at home. Some of them still working. Some are cleaners in the office, in the big office building, and some then they still suffer. Who will take care of the children? This is one of the example that the measures give different impact to the life of the women and also men. Yeah, you will see that do see that people have many of the pressure in the dealing with the COVID-19. And one of the situation that is appear in the newspaper is about the suicide. There is the scholars has analyzed, and they collect the data of the number of the people who commit suicide. And during the last week of April, they come up with a number that the number of the people who commit suicide is the same number of the people who die from the coronavirus. And to this, because of the focus to the number of the people died from coronavirus, but nobody talk much, especially the government representative or representative of the Ministry of Health. They don't pay attention to the number of the people who commit suicide. Yeah, even some people say that these people who commit suicide, they are the ones who already have this kind of mental health disease before. Yeah, but actually in reality, we don't know, and actually people have many of the problem in the economic life, like already like every week almost in 1 or 2 days we will hear the story of people commit suicide, sometimes jump up to from the bridge to the rivers, and uh, and from this we will see almost every day that the people are trying to commit suicide. Yeah. Next, yeah. We will see that the lockdown measures it is very like they are very, the government think that they have very good and effective in trying to control the virus. Many countries asking why Thailand is like good in control the virus. Yeah, so it's because of the lockdown measure. But in reality, we will see that the lockdown also has effect to the life of the women. Yeah, and apart from commit suicide, we will see that some of the women also are getting violent from their husbands. There also appear in the media that the women are injured sometimes by their foreign husband. And in our work at the foundation, we also get uh, report. Sometimes the women call for counseling, and we have found that many of the women, it's hard for them to go out and report to the police. Yeah, and um, we also afraid that during this kind of the pandemic, like appear in the newspaper, that some women are killed by their husband. Not only just violence, but sometimes they like the news appear in that they have agreements sometimes over the economic, sometimes over the money. The husband maybe want the money to spend for alcohol, but for women they want to keep the money for the children. And to this, we are it is very difficult because in time of the uh, pandemic, some people said that it is like people get affected from the virus the same, yeah, and they don't see that during this we really need to look at what is the specific need of the woman. And like also we also learn of some cases that get pregnant and sometimes unwanted pregnancy, and also it is difficult for them to decide, and also have very pressure because sometimes their lovers left them, and it is the woman that has to take care of the children alone. And if you ask how many of the this is the statistic of domestic violence is increased during the pandemic. In case of Thailand, we will see that you will see that there is increasing number because in general with is no pandemic, Thai women it is difficult for them to come and report to the police, and also not only for the woman but also for the children. Many girl children get came across with sexual violence, but it took 6 to 1 year before we have learned about what happened to the girls. Yeah. So in time of the pandemic, and there is no the gender specific policy or concern about the situation, the pressure that putting on the woman, how single mom taking care of their children, and sometimes their elder parents this when they have no work, they have no daily income. So this is one of the things that we need to rest in the society. And it is also difficult because some of particular group of the women, they have no access to the government fund support, because the government announced for people who get affected from these lockdown measures, like some have economic hardship, so they can register to get support, per diem support from the government. But some people, they don't have access to the
Yeah.
mobile smartphone. Yeah. Mhm.
Usa, can you wrap up your discussion?
Yeah. Okay. From this, I would say that uh, it is also difficult for women to live, and some became the homeless. And because of the being homeless, for women and men, it is also very difficult. Some people have to, Thai women are like migrate to work in other provinces. They have to return home, and because of the lockdown, it is also difficult for them to return home. Some like walking home, or sometimes staying to their neighbors or their friends. And it is also the woman also concerned there is no money to send to their parents who help taking care of their children at home. So through this, I would say that we have to say that in the ASEAN countries, that women, especially the poor women, are really affected by the pandemic, and still there is no measure to help women who are now living or staying with the economic hardship, yeah, and also the burden in the family. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Usa. So, in Usa's presentation, and in if we're in particularly in Thailand, it would appear that mental and verbal abuse is interconnected with the or contributing, a big factor to the pandemic. And basically some women are even experiencing are killed, no, because of this. We will see also how mental health is a very important factor that has to be looked into by our government, particularly how it's affected women, no, and even girls in this context, no. I think Usa showed to us how some women or even mothers committed suicide, and some were killed by their husbands because of the problem. Um, I would just like to read two comments from our viewers. So Lisa G said, "Congratulations, WLB, for organizing this activity. Looking forward to hearing about the situation of women from Southeast Asia during the time of COVID." And Christina Lopez even emphasized what Usa has already said, that while domestic violence is prevalent now due to stress from job loss, economic instability, and excessive time at home, women are already in a more vulnerable situation. And so we will now proceed with our second panelist, Rena from Indonesia. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Jelen. So I will present on the topic of invisible women and the children in COVID-19 pandemic, especially in Indonesia. So COVID-19 cases in Indonesia is increasing every day. So from the first, our president announced these cases of two Indonesian women on March 2. So 3 months later, so this number is continued to increase. So now you can see in the slide, the number now is 17,514 cases. So it is very high cases in Indonesia. And then the policy of Indonesian government to address this issue, the COVID pandemic. So the president has urged the public to practice social distancing to stop the spread of COVID by staying at home. So we should work from home and learn at home and pray at home. And also our president has formed the task force to accelerate COVID-19 handling on March 19. So this task force is especially to address this issue. And also next slide. So the government also has policy on large-scale social restrictions. So this is implementation of the regulations on the health quarantine law. So this large-scale social restriction include the closure of schools and workplaces, and also restriction on religious activities, restriction on activities in public place or facilities, and also social and cultural activities, and modes of transportation and other activities related to defense and security. So a lot of restriction to do activities outside. So it's become more stressful for women in Indonesia because usually we can go outside home and working, but now we should stay at home. And only 11 business sectors still allowed to operate during these restrictions. Next slide, please. And I would like also to give a description and some picture. Although there is a regulation on large-scale social restriction, but there is also a lot of violations against these regulations. Even there are legal consequences. So you can look. There is a picture on the how crowded people in the traditional market, and also there is a shop. Shop. So there is a the shop is not cannot open because not include in 11 business that allow to open during pandemic. So there is a policy to close the shop. And then another picture is in the restaurant, because in the restaurant only can provide takeaway and delivery service through online and telephone order. In the next slide, the picture. And also there is a violation on the this regulation, crowded people at the station. And next slide is the, we call it during Eider Fitr. So we call Lebaran in Indonesia. Usually the people going back home to their hometown or village, and then there is a banning from the government because this is a very vulnerable to for COVID transmission. And the pandemic also in Indonesia impacts to economic and social life. So you can see the economic growth of in the next slide. The economic growth rates 5% higher for the past decade, but it's going down. The forecast for 2020 to around 2%. And then next slide, the 3 million people having lost their jobs and 70 million at risk of losing income because of physical distancing. And many micro, small, and medium enterprises, entrepreneurs who were mostly women are bankrupt. And many people, especially among the poor and informal workers, are worried about escaping not only for the COVID, but also from starvation. So you can see, next slide, there is a news in the one newspaper. So our finance ministry, she informed that up to 9 million people to fall into poverty and unemployment as an impact of COVID-19. And this poverty is also worsening everyday lives of marginalized women and the children. So for some women who are working, they lost of job or income. And also because they don't have money, they cannot buy food. And there is hunger and starvation for some poor people, and also difficult to access to health services. And next slide. So there is news in the media. There is hunger hits many Indonesians struggle during COVID pandemic. So there is cases in Serang in Banten. So 43-year-old women died of psychological pressure and hunger on her way to a community health center after 2 days of starvation. So this is only one sample of the case. I believe there are a lot of cases when poor women cannot buy food, cannot buy milk for their children, uh, and then sick, and then maybe they also die because of hunger. And next slide. For during the pandemic, there is also no disaggregated data. Yes, this is during staying at home, because working at home policy, the marginalized and women and girl children experience this is the problem. So double burden because working from home make women experience double burden because there is not support by equal gender divisions and care work at home. So like task of taking care of household, caring for children, and also even working at home and even forced to leave from the house to work. So it is burden for women and also accompany their children because now children should stay at home for to learn because the school is closed, and then mother should accompany the children to study with online platform. So it's very difficult for poor people because they need money to buy quota or internet. And also we have problem of mental health. So Usa already explained about this. So because more life burdens and also stressful for poor people, poor women, so they have to strategize every day on how to be able to eat, how to be able to survive every day. So it's becoming stressful life for them. And domestic violence. So isolation policy at home due to COVID has potential to trigger domestic violence, sexual violence, and even child marriage because of when there is a poor family and then they don't have money for the children to continue their school. Usually, the girl children should stop to continue to school rather than boys. Usually like that in Indonesia for poor people. And then usually the parents doing the child marriage, especially in the village area. Next slide. And during the pandemic, there is no disaggregated data by sex and also sectoral concern. This is one of the main problems why economic policies of government in Indonesia are gender blind and make women and girl children are more invisible in this situation of pandemic. And for next slide, marginalized women and the girl children experience multiple layers of discriminations and also violation even before pandemic because gender inequality. For instance, like for LGBT women groups, they are not documented, nor recognized in Indonesia because the people think this is contradictory with the religious interpretation, and the government and the society in Indonesia is not recognized and respect to LGBT women. Even before this pandemic, there is no data on the discrimination against LGBT women, and it become the issue of the LGBT women remain hidden and invisible in the communities. They are being criminalized and lack access of proper job and reproductive health care. And another marginalized women is next slide, pregnant and lactating women. There is also not yet data of COVID. Next slide. There is not yet data of COVID-19 case of pregnant women covered by media in Indonesia. And pregnant and lactating women have a higher risk of experiencing severe illness, morbidity, and mortality if infected with COVID-19 compared to the general population. Especially in poverty situation because of loss of job and income, the pregnant and lactating women are difficult to buy nutritious food, and its impact on malnutrition, anemia, low birth weight, miscarriage, and also stunting for pregnant women. Stunting is when the baby delivered by the pregnant women is very small and malnutrition. And for lactating women, its impact on poor
Rena,
yes,
please wrap up your discussion?
yes.
Thank
And
you.
for the girl children, so the girl children because of the girl children has to learn from home by online platform that I already mentioned. Next slide. So it's very difficult for the girls and also the poor family to buy quota of internet and also using the technology. So sometimes the girl children cannot continue the school or cannot follow the online education system, especially for poor family. and that I already mentioned also about the vulnerable of the child from the girl children from the poor family on the practice of child marriage. And there is also some response from the government of Indonesia for the especially for pregnant and lactating women. This is some response from the government, but this is not specifically targeted to marginalized women, other marginalized women. Like our Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, they provide some aid package for vulnerable women groups, but only based in Jakarta, not in all over of Indonesia province. And our Indonesian Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology developed guidelines for preventing and handling pregnant women with COVID-19 at hospital, but this is only for the doctor. So it's very limited policy for from our government uh, and programs for especially for marginalized women and girl children in Indonesia. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Rena. Yes. Can you please mute your microphone? Yeah. Thank you, Rena. I'm sorry that I have to cut short your presentation. I know that 10 minutes would not be enough really to cover the issues that women and girls are facing. No? But in Indonesia's context, you will see that it's almost the same. No? Experiences that we raised no, as during the start of the discussion that there is a problem with data and we keep on surfacing women's issues, girls, but it seems that it is left unaddressed because there's no data. No, we are not collecting data from the ground, and I think this is the reason why we really wanted to come out with this webinar because we really wanted to surface the voices of women and girls from the ground and use this platform to call on, as Rena and Usa said, a responsive policy that looks into the specific and distinct context of women and girls. And now we'll proceed with our next presenter from the Philippines, Liz. We will ask Liz now to look into the interrelationship of VAW and economy in relation to the Philippines. Liz, you have 10
Hi,
minutes.
yes, good afternoon, everyone. So, as Jilan has said, I would like to try to connect VAW or violence against women and girls in connection to the economy and in the context of this pandemic. So even before this crisis, we know that marginalized women and girls suffer disproportionately from inequalities. The poverty that they endure, plus their being women and girls, all play in the discrimination that they experience, pushing them to further poverty. The lack of livelihood remains a top problem in communities, and women are often found in low-wage jobs, in the manufacturing, service, and tourism industry, for example. And there is lack of or limited access to quality healthcare services, including sexual and reproductive healthcare services and products and services. So proper information dissemination that reaches marginalized women and girls is also a problem. And they also face multiple barriers when they try to access justice, especially from the violence perpetrated against them, whether in the streets, in workplaces, or even at home. So for marginalized women and girls, we are talking about, for example, those residing in rural areas or far away from town centers or city centers, indigenous women and girls, those with disability, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgenders, those with HIV, migrants, and all of them also face their own distinct barriers and suffering when we talk about inequalities and access to justice. So this crisis has further placed marginalized women and girls at a greater disadvantage because the effects to members in the household also affect them. As mentioned by my colleagues, from the loss of jobs and job insecurity by the family members and even the women themselves, and the limited freedoms that we all experience, including the freedom to move, no? And how all these affect our mental health, as was also shared a while ago. So such are also differently experienced by women. The household burden and the mental burden that they all carry from taking care of everyone in the household, including the sick and the elderly, worrying also if their family members who got sick are contracted with COVID-19. So our hospitals cannot cover everyone who have symptoms of the disease, and so the patients are advised to stay at home when they're not facing worse symptoms. And it's usually we guess who usually who takes on the burden to care for these sick family members. So on top of all these is violence, which is another vulnerability that women and girls face. So even before this problem, violence is a persisting problem, and many of the cases also happen inside the home or very close to home, perpetrated by intimate partners, husbands, stepfathers, uncles, and neighbors. There is already, even before this crisis, there is already difficulty for women and girl children victims to access justice from the violence that they experience. And from our research in WEAV in 6 countries in Southeast Asia, the violence experienced by the victims continues to be trivialized. The attitudes on rape and other forms of violence include stories of women and girl children victims who are met with disbelief and even further violence by family members and friends. And when they do try to report to the authorities, especially at the local level, they also receive victim blaming, their credibility and their sexual history being questioned. So just like the report we received from our partner community in a rural area of this 15-year-old girl child who, upon realizing that she got pregnant from the rape committed against her, went to the police but was not believed. Even her mother did not support her. Only when accompanied by community women leaders to the police did they entertain her case, and transportation that time was easier as they are able to request for the use of a police car to bring her to the hospital. In our organization in the Philippines, we receive cases of victims of domestic violence, of which the women victims and their abusive partners are told by the local authorities to come up with a mutual resolution, to resolve it by themselves. And that this issue of domestic violence is usually not prioritized among other issues and problems in communities. They are only considered as a marital concern, no? Solved only by the involved parties. And it is also a fact that the lack of information and access to livelihood by marginalized women and girls force them to rather stay in abusive relationships, only to report when the violence has escalated to severe forms. So before this crisis, we also received many queries from victims on their cases, what to do and which government agencies to go. They inquire to us on how to approach their cases when even those who are supposed to help them and assist them, like the barangay VAW desks, police, and other authorities in the locality or municipality, dismiss or do not entertain their cases. So for the deaf, the lack of interpreters, for example, lead to the dismissal of their cases. So that's how it's difficult for marginalized women and girls victims to access justice. Reporting to the authorities does not guarantee that your case is recorded and addressed. So our organization assists them with the step-by-step process or refer them to relevant government agencies who might want to take on the case. So much more should be done on proper information dissemination and strong referral system by the government. So now, imagine in this pandemic where quarantines or lockdowns compel everyone to stay at home and when there is lack of mobility, victims, apart from the stress or the mental load that they are burdened with, um, for 24/7, they are also trapped with their abuser. No, so given that the loss of jobs and job insecurity can also expose them to further abuse, which can also, especially that nowadays we are not sure when this family isolation will end. In this environment and nowadays, abusers can also further get away with impunity. So because abusers are always at home, there is added difficulty in reporting the abuse. We cannot go out because there is lack of transportation. The transportation available cannot is not available in all areas. And even if they do report to the police, now in this crisis, they are met with responses telling them that the case will be addressed after the quarantine period. When we don't know for a fact when this quarantine and isolation will end. So quite several cases, there have been some reports on this to us. So the lack of mobility still poses a further challenge even to family members who wanted to act on the case. For example, we have an incest case that we received. Incest, as we know, is rarely reported by abusers because the family members are the abusers. And if they are discovered and reported, it is hard for the other family members to pursue the case, even if we know that incest and rape is a criminal case. So in this crisis, as much as other family members wanted to act on the case of a 15-year-old on their 15-year-old niece who was sexually abused by his uncle for 5 years, the father is still thinking twice about pursuing the case because it involves his brother. But one family member, the aunt, wanted to act on it. So the case was reported to the police, but they were told to come back after the quarantine period. So the aunt who was concerned and wanted to look after the 15-year-old victim was in another province and cannot come to help her niece because she would not be able to cross the borders. So in this case alone, we can see how violence against women and girls continues to be trivialized and their issues considered not really an important issue, even in times of crisis. So nowadays, we are also receiving more cases of cybercrime against women and girls. So even in online spaces, we are not safe. No, we are targets of these crimes. So we're saying that VAW is something that needs to be seriously addressed. It is a phenomenon that happens in conjunction with women's multiple life burdens and mental health, which continues to be invisible. So it comes that at the national level, the government should prioritize funding to agencies that would look into the welfare of women and girls, especially in cases of violence. All the more, we shouldn't cut budgets for health, education, and social services that also particularly tend to the needs of women and girl victims. So in the Philippines, we have the Rape Crisis Center, which continues to remain underfunded since it was passed in 1998. So in this crisis, it is best to make our policies or guidelines more responsive and friendly to women and girl child victims. Um, Given the challenges faced, we should make our policies and guidelines we should modify them or make them address the specific needs of women and girls. And at the ASEAN level, we can start by a gender and sex disaggregated data on violence against women and children, and other data, including women and girls in the economy. We need to expose the issues women and girls face, starting with data, by surfacing their stories or narratives so that they would not remain invisible, and to inform a gender and age-responsive policies. So VAW is still treated as an invisible issue or not prioritized. It is a separate issue, merely treated as a socio-cultural one, but not an economic issue. However, feminists and advocates have pushed that VAW is an issue that has far greater socio-economic impacts that in the long run affects the economy. So VAW is always at the backseat when we talk about issues on development, and it is rarely mentioned by economists as an indicator of development just because we cannot put figures in it or measure it. So our market economy privileges what could be measured, disregarding issues that, if we examine and analyze, are significant when we tackle economies. So violence against women and girls have socioeconomic impacts, so many of them immeasurable, including government spending, effects to families, losing a 1 day worth of job to tend to their family members who are victims, cases like that. Even women workers who may not work properly or not considered inefficient by businesses, just because their trauma has not been addressed. And we know that the government funding on addressing girl children victim and women victims trauma should be also prioritized. So there is nowadays we see a spike in the cases of violence against women and children, as can be seen by the cases that we receive from our organizations, compared before the crisis. So it was also reported here in the Philippines that 1.5 months after the implementation of the quarantine. Yes.
Liz, please wrap up. Thank you.
Okay. So there are, the PNP has recorded 700 plus cases of violence against women and 500 plus cases of violence against children. That's just 1.5 months after implementation of ECQ. So this is already alarming. So today, sexual exploitation is also, online sexual exploitation is also an issue. So would we want an economy that thrives from the sexual exploitation of children, for example, in these times of crisis? What kind of economy should we promote and enable? So we have to make sure that economies and economic policies should be more responsive to the plight of marginalized girls and women, and that starts by including violence against women and girls as a development issue and other women and girls issues, which are often made invisible. So,
Okay. Thank you very much, Liz. I think Liz was able to capture the key points that we wanted to highlight for this particular session. I think Liz posed a very um, challenging question in terms of what does the economy value, given the invisibility of women and girls, given that women and girls are unaccounted, and therefore what kind of policies are our government are developing, are coming up, given that we still remain invisible until now? What kind of economic response and policies will it include if our voices, our experiences, and contexts are not included in these plans? No. Okay. So we thank you very much, Usa, Rena, and Liz. Now we will proceed with the open forum. No. We were able to gather some questions. I'll read it first, and then I'll ask you to answer. No. Particularly, this is a question from Jade and from Liv Burgos. Jade said, "How this is for USA? USA, how are they dealing with with women's mental health issue in Thailand, given that they have high suicide rate because of COVID? So basically, how your government is responding to high suicide rate of women." The question is also the same from Liv Burgos. I would like to ask how mental health is being supported in the different countries, coming from the perspective that in the Philippines, this is a weak link in the country's health system. Please take note of the question. No? And then there's a question from Lisa G. Slowdown in economies of Southeast Asian countries as a result of the pandemic will further exacerbate the already difficult situation of many women. So I think this is a question for everyone. How can we make governments respond to prioritize needs of women, given that we women remain invisible? And then another question from Lenlen Messina. With funding challenges to be more apparent given the crisis, what role can CSOs and regional orgs play in ensuring that assistance and support to victims of VAW and those providing care? So I'll leave with that first. May I ask first USA to respond to how your country is responding to the high to the increasing suicide rate in Thailand. Usa?
Yeah, actually, I don't see the specific measures, but only the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security that propose that people can come to their shelter, like the homeless people. They were asked to come to the government shelter because otherwise they will be pressed charged because we have the curfew at certain time that people are not allowed on the street. So there is some social services available, but I don't see the Ministry of Health that's really discuss with the government the real impact and also how to help more emergency on this rising number of the people who commit suicide. Thank you. And also because of the large number of the people are left out from the government services and also government fund support. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll ask Liz and Rena to respond. The question of Lisa, how can we make government respond to priorities or needs of women? because you've emphasized that women remains to be invisible. So what should we do? How can we make government answer to us by prioritizing our issues, our concerns? Liz and Rena.
Yes. So it's talking about how we advocate the government, yeah, to prioritize the problems of women and girl children. So this is example in Indonesia. Usually we gathering data from the community about the impact of the COVID through marginalized women and girl children, because there is no national data from our government. So we should looking for the data from the ground, from the community. So after that, if we have the data, so we can argument to the government. For instance, like the data on the problems of pregnancy and lactating women. So we have the data on the impact, and its impact on the high maternal mortality rate in Indonesia. It's will become higher if we not support to the pregnant and lactating women, because usually the social aid only giving for food, but not only not for the vitamins or nutritious food or milk for the pregnancy and lactating women. So we talked to the Ministry of Women Empowerment about the problem, and then that's why the Ministry of Women Empowerment responds to our concern, and then they provide some social aid, especially for pregnant and also lactating women, by giving like vitamin and also milk for them. So once again, we need data from the ground, from the community, and on the impact to the marginalized women and the children in the community.
Liz, would you like to
Um,
respond to the question?
I'd like to support Rena's answer that data is really important. We need to surface the specific issues that what are the gaps, no, what are the we need to address the gaps that women and girls face. So we have to ask what are their specific needs, what should be addressed, and maybe also we have to critically engage with governments, as they have the resources and the network. It's not always organizations, NGOs or civil society who would always take on the burden, but we also need a strong support from our governments.
Okay. There's another question. Maybe before I ask Mirna to add to our discussion, um, can you please respond to the question? Maybe all of you can respond to this quickly. This is a question from Lenlen. What do you think is the role of CSOs and regional organizations? Or what role can CSOs and regional orgs play in ensuring that assistance and support to victims of VAW and those providing care? So she was asking what basically do you think will be our role, no? In ensuring that we continue supporting the assistance and support to victims of VAW, no? Because that's a challenging work for all of us. Maybe Usa, would you like to go first and then followed by Liz and then Rena last?
Yeah, the foundation also work with also the group of the CSO, in particular the marginalized group. Like we also have like a discussion and come up with the joint recommendation, and we write a letter to the Prime Minister in order to request the government to respond to the socio-economic impact of the quarantine or some of specific measure that has impact to the people, in particular to the specific group of the people that are left out from the healing, the fund support from the government. And we still have to monitor. And actually, there are also many of CSO volunteer groups, and also like the foundation, the network that provide support to the like single mom, the women who are in need, who contact in our Facebook inbox, and also many of organizations also working with the like disabled people network in order to outreach to the people who are in need and also like in the emergency and in need of emergency response. So we are now pushing for the government, but at the same time, we members of the civil society also are working together in order to outreach to the people in the remote community and also in the poor communities. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Liz.
Um, Maybe for us, with our workings with our partner communities, we see that change, when we advocate for change, they are our sources of change. No? So we try through capacity building at the grassroots level, try to influence at the personal and maybe at the family level and community level through through trying to break stigma, stereotypes on violence, for example. So those are some of the things that we do at the community level, and with regional organizations, maybe maybe for organizations at the regional level, they should also try to recognize the issues of women and girls in their own advocacies, put a gender lens in the advocacies that are they are trying to push at the regional level.
Okay. Thank you, Liz. And last but not the least, Rena.
Yes, so for Karna Mitra, we work both level at the community and also advocacy to the government. So at the community, we're doing the community empowerment, and also we inform about the violence against women and also the impact on COVID for women. And when we find the case of domestic violence or sexual violence or child marriage, we also encourage the women member of community also to help another women. So women that we build women solidarity and care in the community to handle the case of violence against women, because there is very limited access for services from the government during this COVID pandemic, because we cannot go outside. It's very difficult to go to the hospital and the police because yes, the large scale social restriction in Indonesia. And then for the government, yes, we have the gender mainstream. We have coalition on civil society organization, and especially we also have the group, women's group, to make sure gender mainstreaming in the policy and also the program of the government. So we continue to advocate gender mainstreaming in the COVID-19 handling in Indonesia. And we work with another women's network to monitor, to monitor the budget uh, allocation, especially for the women and the girl children.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know that you still have so many things to say. But thank you, Rena, Liz, and Usa. I think in this panel we were able to really raise the question of how VAW interlink with the economy, and how economy tried to um, not to prioritize, no, or the link with VAW, no. And what we're saying is that if our government continue to disregard issues of women, continues to make us invisible, then we are actually posing this question, that what kind of economic policies or economy are we pushing post COVID-19, if this remains to be if women's issues remains to be invisible. So just to wrap up discussion, may I ask Mirna to maybe to add a little bit, and then maybe we can proceed, no, with our second panel. Mirna.
Thank you, Jelen. Thank you and congratulations to our panel speakers for vividly bringing to this discussion the actual situation and issues of marginalized women in communities that are often trivialized or are often not recognized, and also clearly showing that this pandemic has hit women and girls the hardest in different ways. You have also shown the undeniable intersection of VAW, as Jelen said, with economy that has become more pronounced and more intense during this crisis. Taking off from this discussion, I would like to highlight 3 points and perhaps with some stories that are also happening in the region. First, the first point is the stay home policy of the government to keep people safe from contracting the coronavirus has laid bare persisting gender stereotyping in the region, such as that women are weak, so they get bullied in quarantine checkpoints, that women are sex objects, so they get raped by law enforcers of quarantine checkpoints or by their neighbor or family members, especially nowadays that access to justice has become unclear and much, much more difficult. And that women are home and family carers, so they do everything to find ways how to feed their families, how to keep their children intact at home, how to keep their small house comfortable to accommodate all the members of the family 24/7 a day, and how to provide pleasure to their husbands or partners. And that elderly women and women with disability are weak, sick, and vulnerable, so they should not be allowed to get out unless they needed to buy medicine, as if the only thing they needed during the crisis is medicine, no? With all this discrimination, it's not surprising to hear that women in communities are suffering from depression, anger, and anxiety, affecting their mental health more negatively. So what is happening in Thailand and even in the Philippines? Second point, the COVID crisis also exposed the horrible truth that despite the many international and local laws against domestic violence lingers and it surges during the COVID crisis as people are forced to remain in the house 24/7 a day, as daily survival is creating more tension in the family, and as resources and services meant to address domestic violence are mostly diverted to addressing the COVID crisis. This also reflects the sad truth that governments and agencies lack the full understanding of domestic violence. That it is actually during crises like this that domestic violence becomes more apparent and more frequent and more intense. So it is during this crisis that domestic violence should be more addressed. Third point, gender stereotyping has pushed women to be employed in garments, textile, and footwear. They are now faced with job insecurity, particularly in Cambodia. Joanna Casinerio of Mahidol University reported that the sector currently being at risk the most is the country's garments, textile, and footwear sector, which employs more than 750,000 workers, most of whom are internal women migrants from remote provinces. Also, as women tend to work in the informal labor market, they do not benefit from existing social protection schemes that are meant only for salaried employees. According to Chen Chen Lee of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, only 4 out of 10 ASEAN countries, these are Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, have achieved near universal health coverage. While it is true that anyone may contract the virus, the COVID pandemic has further pushed to poverty, hunger, and discrimination the poor and vulnerable communities in Southeast Asia, such as women and girls, elderly, people with disability, migrant workers, informal workers, and ethnic minorities. So, for us to have a better grasp on the daily experiences of women, migrant workers, and women in conflict areas during the COVID crisis, we will now proceed to our second panel. So let us welcome our panelist speakers from Brunei Darussalam and Burma. May I call our first speaker from Brunei, Nur Judy of Project Women Brunei, who will share with us the situations of women migrant workers in Brunei during the COVID crisis. Nur Judy?
Thank you very much, Mirna. And thank you, we, for inviting Project Women Brunei as guest panelists for this afternoon's webinar. Um, all right, so the topic I'm going to discuss will be the women migrant workers in Brunei, the uncertain future of work. In Brunei, our status on COVID-19 cases, we have total of 141 positive cases as of today, and 136 has recovered, and we have one death. Over 5,000 foreign workers undergo swab tests for COVID-19, and these are random tests carried out by the government among construction workers, hospital cleaners, department store cashiers, where in majority are migrant women. The sector most affected by the pandemic here in Brunei Darussalam are tourism industry, the restaurant business, the catering business, and hospitality, where we see a lot of migrant people, workers working in this area. And the economic impact of the pandemic on women migrant workers in Brunei is their earning capacity has been significantly reduced during temporary closure or scaling down of the operations of these businesses since the lockdown. It all started sometime in March 14. And women migrant workers in Brunei experienced salary cuts, temporary salary terminations, termination of employment rights, and some were laid off and they have no money to buy food. So there are assistance given to them by the respective embassies. And in this case, I'm highlighting the Philippine embassy and the Indonesian embassy because these are the two ASEAN member state countries who have the highest number of migrant workers working in Brunei. For the Philippine embassy, they provide the food assistance program for overseas Filipino workers. And today, there are 2,291 OFWs receiving relief bags with assorted food supplies from the Philippine embassy. So you can see here in the photo, the embassy personnel prepare the food bags consisting of assorted food items, and this has been their activities daily to ensure that migrant workers needing assistance are provided with the food stuff. And here, Philippine embassy distributing the food stuff among the Filipino community in Brunei, specifically for migrant workers. And this is to keep the Bayanihan spirit alive amidst COVID-19 pandemic. And these workers are mostly affected with reduced working days. They work by shift, and some are still receiving their salary, but it's reduced from their normal salary because business is really down. And again, this is another set of overseas Filipino migrant workers who receive the assistance, the food staff assistance from the Philippine embassy. The overseas Filipino workers also receive financial assistance, specifically to those who lost their job temporarily. So a one-time grant of $200 are given. This is through by the Department of Labor and Employment through Philippine Overseas Labor Office, or they call it POLO. It is on a first-come, first-served basis, and once applications are accepted, and the applications had been open since April 11, 2020. The embassy at the moment is in the process of seeking more funding to provide additional financial assistance to the rest of those who had sent their application. As regards to the Indonesian migrant workers, the Indonesian embassy has also provided assistance through the provision of basic necessities to their citizens. A number of 512 Indonesians received food assistance containing rice, sugar, instant noodles, soy sauce, cooking oil, coffee, powdered milk, and canned sardines. So this is part of the 700 meal packages distributed as requested by the community. And they also had a first online dialogue with the Indonesian ambassador, with the Indonesian community in Brunei, Darussalam, and they had discussions on the issues and challenges that they face as migrant workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So issues raised include differences in work with what is written in the employment. They discussed delayed salary, difficulty in transferring between employers, and some did not receive salaries according to agreed contract, and the need for income being temporarily out of work since COVID-19 outbreak. And the migrant workers were reminded that the process of transfer of employers must be in accordance with procedures in Brunei. The Indonesian embassy also assisted the migrant workers who would like to go back home to their country. So far, 361 Indonesian migrant workers have been repatriated via chartered flights. I'd like to emphasize here that that is a self-funded trip by the migrant workers themselves. And those who also were repatriated are migrant workers who completed their contract period, and some who had been also isolated, but they're negative when it comes to their test of COVID-19. They have completed their quarantine and no longer allowed to be in Brunei, so they have to go back home. And they were part of the group whose flight were chartered by the Indonesian embassy to go back to their home country in Indonesia. There were also local NGOs who assisted the migrant workers in Brunei, and one of them is Youth Against Slavery, Brunei. It is an NGO, a youth NGO that highlight the issues of migrant workers. So they distributed food packages to migrant workers affected by COVID-19, and leaflets about COVID-19 and how to stay safe were translated in local dialects of migrant workers and distributed around. So concerns over the uncertain future of work, basically it centers on reduced income and or the probable loss of income is a looming nightmare for most women migrant workers. They have financial obligations back home, that is payment of debts and loans, and they have a family to feed and support. They have no alternative source of income if they go back home, and they will need capital to start a livelihood program. The uncertain nature of COVID-19 pandemic in the country of work and the country of origin makes the future of work uncertain for most women migrant workers. Here are the references of my data and the report that I just presented. And so far, that's the status of women migrant workers in Brunei. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you for keeping up with the time. So in your presentation, you have shown how the COVID crisis have heightened job insecurity among women migrant workers in Brunei, and even, of course, when they go back home. So from a different context, let's also see how COVID crisis is impacting on women in conflict areas. So let's now proceed to our next panel speaker from Burma. Sir.
Yes, hello. Good evening. I'm Susan from Women's League of Burma. So for now, I would like to share about the COVID pandemic happening in Burma. Firstly, I would like to brief before I talk about this presentation. So in Burma, we have very complicated content, especially politically, economically, and socially. We have also a lot of different ethnics, and also we have a lot of different ethnic armed groups, and also we have a different other armed groups. So that's so many how to say it, control areas controlled by the armed group and also controlled by the government, and some areas was controlled like miscontrol. So there's very complicated geographic and also administrative and managing the community in current situations. So we have seen the COVID pandemics have been in the world, and especially I would like to talk about in Burma right now. So we have seen more than 187 positive case, and some 6 died, and we have seen every day increases day by day of the number of the positive case. But we have seen mostly happen in Rangoon region, in Rangoon city, some small positive case happen in some state and some region. But we see the government have taken responsible, but we see it's very centralized, taking responsible. Women's League of Burma, we focus operate area in ethnic group, and also we focus more in remote areas. So we seems that the response by the government not taken to the ethnic areas, mostly Women's League of Burma's member organization and other NGO and CSO taking responsibility to do prevention or assist the IDP or people who are struggle in conflict. So this is the situation we have seen in the conflict and post-conflict area. So can I see the first slide? The next. So I will to share about the government responsibility. As I mentioned before, that very centralized response and also not focuses at an area. And also we have aware and know there's the personnel of the healthcare expedition. It's lower than the personnel of the military expedition in Myanmar. So it strongly affects to the Burma's healthcare sisters. And so it will lead no better treatment for Burman people in a situation in right now, and also not enough budget for the healthcare as well. And that next slide. This is the government has planned, and also they also have planning for the prevention protection for the COVID, but it's not include the gender perspective and the feminist perspective, and also not include awareness linking to the violence issues as well. So we have seen right now even the COVID crisis and the pandemic happening, but the violence is increased, and especially domestic violence is increased because of there's everything locked down, and also we cannot travel, we cannot go out, we cannot find the food, especially ethnic people. I know they cannot how to say, they are regularly, they have the farmings, and they have their gardens, and as they have export and import their property and their agriculture, what they are having the agriculture. But for now they have to throw up their whatever the came out from their agriculture garden, they have to throw out in the rivers, and they cannot sell, and they cannot buy any food as well. So we have seen right now the challenge and the problem is the ethnic area. So we have seen many difficulty, and on the other side also we see the fighting happening, but the government especially the government didn't give any order. Even we are how to say, demand, and we are push the government to stop the war, stop the fighting. But we have seen the military announced that they will stop the war. They will stop the war. This plus in Rakhine State they are not stopping the war, because they are continues the war and the fighting in that area. Next slide. So for this presentation, I would like to mention three main problems in current situation that Burma faces. The first, as I mentioned before, the fighting happening in Rakhine State, Shan State, current state, and that's in Rakhine State is going on. The fighting is going on. So since last month, we have got a record. 138 people died and 147 got injured, and 34 were arrested during the fighting between Tamaro and the Araka army. And also human rights violation abused by the Tamaro, such as internet shutdown, and journalists are arrested, and freedom of expression is upsetting. So this is the fighting in Rakhine State that we have collected last month. But till now the fighting and continue, and also the human rights abuses also continues. That we have seen mostly women and girls and children was IDP and vulnerable and suffering in these situations. So we have seen right now, we have heard that they have faced this kind of the food crisis, and they have support that there's no group cannot reach to them to support and assist them. So they are very how to say, faces kind of the crisis right now. And the second is Ministry of the Health and Support and other civil society. They provide high awareness raising about COVID-19, but it's still difficult to practice in some areas in Myanmar. For example, like Chin and especially Raka IDP and current IDP, so they have, we have the government announced the rules and announced the principles to prevent and protect not more than 5 people, and you have to stay 6 feet far from each other, and also you have to stay home. But in the IDP camp, so we cannot stay like that, and also the phases, the difficulty that they face, especially food and water. They said, some of the refugees in the Kache IDP said, we don't have enough water to wash our hands in our IDP camp. We are struggling for enough drinking water. We have only one well in the camp, which is as more than 100 families use that. So we can see them. So even they want to protect and prevent, but they have to struggle their life. So it's not only Kachin IDP, but also other IDP like Rakhine and Current as well. The third one, we see the COVID clash in Myanmar economy. For example, we see line out bank interest also decreases, and also the dollar exchange also unstable, and the travel and the tourism and the trading, everything stopped. And other essential medical materials went out of the market, and also the price of the basic food is increases. So to add, many migrant workers came back from many different countries like Thailand and Malaysia and China. Those migrant workers also, a lot of migrant workers come back, and also inside Burma, the worker, there are 90,000, more than 90,000 workers having jobless and having problem. In last month, they have demonstrated for their salary and for their protection, but there's because of their demonstrators, and they was arrested, and also they also dismissed by their from their job workplace. So kind of this problem also still going on to find out the way to be taking action. And now some of the like a labor group and other civil society group and a women's group cooperate each other and also push government to take any action. So for now, government locked down the industry and other economic zone, and that's try to manage and fight off the weight. But until now, we didn't get any response and action for the worker. So we have seen the worker are still faces kind of the problem, and then we have heard some EU also try to support those workers and try to assist them. So we see the current situation of the politically also very complicated between armed group and also government military.
Sir.
They are also in their area. They are trying to yes. They are trying to prevent and protect Ibadan. Yes, I will repeat. Trying it, but it's they are not trust. They are not building trust, and also they are not cooperate. So it means that the situation will be more complicated. Even the political and social and economics are not meeting it. So this is the situation happening in Burma right now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. So in your presentation, you
Yes.
have shown how the multiple oppression experienced by internally displaced people, especially the women, and how it is very difficult for uh, war-torn communities to observe the health protocols because of their situation. We have water, we have smoke, there are no sanitation. So that situation alone, you can just imagine how difficult it is for women in there. No? So thank you for both of you, Norjudy and Sir, for your sharing. Before we proceed open forum, I would like to share in this forum how economic insecurity during the COVID crisis has exacerbated violence against women in rural communities in the Philippines, specifically in northern Quezon Province. Our partner communities in Quezon Province reported that women farmers and women whose families live on daily basis, have received and whose lives are seasonal, have been driven to further hunger and poverty due to the COVID crisis. To survive the situation, some women have accepted working as frontliners in ECQ's checkpoints in exchange of minimal salary despite the health risks they confront every day as they are not well equipped with health gears. They only have the face mask. Others try to find work with their well-to-do nearest neighbor for paid domestic work, just like cooking or laundry. Others look for any product from their neighbors that they could sell amidst the danger of being caught for violating the ECQ rules. Actually, one lactating mother who has no other means was forced to beg for the milk of her baby. And sadly, there are few who resorted to prostitution done in the wilderness in the middle of the night. While women try to find ways to feed their families amidst the various restrictions in communities, they became more vulnerable to
Uh,
discrimination in different
Excuse me,
ways.
sorry,
Uh,
You're
Hello?
no way. Yes, can we ask I think someone's mic is on, so it creates echo. Can you please check your mic and can you mute your mic please so that we can hear Mirna clearly? Thank you.
Thank you, Jelen. Okay, so to continue, for example, women frontliners experience verbal abuse while implementing ECQ policies. Women doing domestic work are paid very low. Women vendors are also forced to sell their products at very low cost just to earn something. And women forced into prostitution face stigma from the community. Aside from the burden of feeding the family, which has become much more difficult in this time of crisis, work at home has become more burdensome for women, with all members of the family staying in their small house 24/7 a day. You can just imagine that you have 8 members of the family staying in a very small hut, especially those with children who love to go out and play. How are they going to discipline those children? Domestic quarrel that often end up to verbal abuse and even marital rape has become frequent, as Liz already stated a while ago. This has added to women's mental load and emotional burden. With all these problems loaded on women during the crisis, most women are worried of the horrifying thought of the bills and credits that they needed to pay after the crisis. Where will they get the money to pay for this? Added to this is the thought of economic and job insecurity after the COVID. Aside from this, most women are also worried that they will get pregnant because their husband is always at home and doing nothing, almost doing nothing. Family planning services are scarce and some women cannot avail of them because most health workers at the barangay level are also busy acting as frontliners for COVID-19. That they forget other services, which include reproductive health and health services. And it is also during the COVID crisis that access to justice, as we had said a while ago, and services have become scarce and available. So that's the situation in the Philippines, which I think is not different from the situation of the countries that shared earlier. And to proceed to our open forum, I would like to ask first a question to Judy. We all know that job insecurity for women, particularly migrant women workers, can increase women's risks of violence. So how does the COVID crisis make women migrant workers more vulnerable to violence, particularly those working in tourism industry of Brunei?
All right, thank you, Mirna. Basically, the tourism industry in Brunei is really, as I say, really zero at the moment. Like there's really zero income for migrant workers in the tourism industry or working in the tourism industry. So they're not receiving any salaries except minimal meal allowance from their employers just to maintain them. They refuse also to go back home in their country of origin, such as Philippines or Indonesia, because um, the violence against them may even increase further because they'll be coming home without any income or money to bring, nor there will be no more future income for them when they are back in their home country. So the fear of losing their job is really, really high. So they prefer to stay back in Brunei, hoping that the crisis will ease out and things will get better. So they're hanging on actually to their job. So I think I will equate violence in terms of the mental torture that they are being worried about the future of their work and what will be their option when they totally lose their job. If the company that they work with will declare bankruptcy or will close down, they will know there will be no other option for them but to go back home. But here in Brunei, the thing is we are quite flexible in terms of allowing them to transfer employers. So if there will be some employers willing to take them, then that would be an added lifting of a burden to them. But that is not the case all the time. So it really all depends. So in the meantime, they feel that they're better off here in Brunei rather than going back home to their home country of origin to avoid further mental stress and subject themselves to any other forms of domestic violence or violence against them by the families that are dependent on them.
Okay, thank you, Judy. I think there is another question that is meant for you. It
Okay.
comes from Claire Locson. She said, it's important that we know what is actually going on the ground and what women want in response to identified issues. So thank you very much for sharing and insight and ways forward. That's not the question. Actually, sorry.
It's a comment.
This is a question.
It's
There
a
could
reflection.
check
Yeah.
disaggregated data on informal workers in the countries here that was useful for government to immediately reach out to this sector to provide aid. How is this data gathered and recorded? That's the question.
For the situation in Brunei, right?
Mm.
Okay. Both embassies, I will refer to the strategy done by the Philippine Embassy and the Indonesian Embassy. They sent out notification for all affected migrant workers to apply for the assistance, the food assistance and the financial assistance to the embassy. So the embassy, under the Philippine Overseas Labor Office, they gather all this data on who are those most affected. And it's not a matter of one migrant worker simply filling up the form and submitting to the embassy. It requires some certification from the employer that they indeed did that cannot provide the full salary for a certain period because their business is closed temporarily. So they need to provide proof like 3 months salary, a slip to attach to their application to the embassy, and the embassy will be reviewing all those. So the employers are also involved in the process. So that's how the embassy ensure that those who are really in need are the ones who receive the assistance.
Okay, thank you, Judy. I think she's also more interested on the informal workers. Do you have informal workers or are migrant workers in Brunei? None, no?
We do have, so we call them like the cleaners, right? Cleaners.
Mhm,
There are some who work in the farm. Yeah, there are.
mhm.
We do have informal workers working in Brunei.
Okay.
Yeah, basically on the maintenance side, in the maintenance, and they're doing all this
And
manual job. Yeah.
and your country has disaggregated data on those informal workers.
We do have an official data
Okay.
on that. Yeah. So basically,
Okay.
the Labor Department in Brunei will have that supplied by the different embassies, and they counter check with the data in the Labor Department and the Immigration Department. So there is an official
Mhm.
data for that. Yeah.
Okay. So before I proceed, thank you, Judy. Before I proceed to my question to Sir, I would like to take the acknowledgement from Jade. Jade Lung of Kaisaka, Philippines. She said, thank you all for sharing and trying to answer our questions. Special mention to Rena. We miss you here in the Philippines. Thank you also for our wonderful facilitators, Jilen and Mirna. Congratulations to all. Thank you, Wee, for doing this very enriching sharing of stories and struggles. Susulong ang kababaihan, ano pa man ang sirkumstansyang kinalalagyan. So, I think you understood the last sentence. Okay, so let's proceed to the question for Sir of Burma. Here is the question, just like in the Miss Universe. In conflict areas, it is widely known that sexual violence against women and girls are rampant, especially with ethnic oppression, as your sharing showed. My question is, how does the COVID-19 crisis exacerbate sexual abuse and violence against women and girls, and how is it different from non-conflict areas? So that's for you, sir.
We can't hear, sir.
Sir,
Sorry.
could you please turn on your mic?
Hello, hello. I forgot to on the microphone. Sorry. So uh, that's your to answer your question. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, so as I mentioned before, there's still sexual violence and domestic violence ongoing without access to justice. So what we can compare to the post-conflict and conflicts and conflicts. In the conflict areas, we women's more having concern and worried, and also having more vulnerable. What they have it so for now, so they have to worry about the fighting. What times they have to run out. What type they have to suffer. So they have worry and concern of that, and also the concern of the COVID-19 right now. Also, they are also faces that the food crisis and the any other supplies that they need, they did not get easy, and also the security of their life. So we see now that the everything locked down, and especially the women and the girls, they have to stay home. Even they have no food, they have no for their livelihood. The parents have to go out and also have to find out some food and some for their livelihood. So that's the security of their lives also most struggle than the people who are staying in non-conflict. So we see, and they can't access any assistance from the any group easily when they face the sexual violence and domestic violence. They cannot report, and also they are also not dare to report the sexual violence if happening to them. So in the non-conflict area, we have some, they also have CSO and some groups that they can report and they ask for the assistance. And also, they also, feel any mechanisms for report it. So it is very we see the situation very different from the conflicts. We see that the most of the women and girls based in the conflicts are more vulnerable than the women and girl in non-conflicts, and also they are also burdened, the double of their burden, their life, and also that's why some of them they face the mental problems and also trauma problem because of many double of their burdens they have to carry on that. Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir, and thank you, Judy. So to wrap up our discussion, perhaps
Yeah.
my co-facilitator, as beautiful as I am, will have more to say. Jelen. Jelen.
We're already about. Yes, hello. Am I clear? Can you hear me
Yes, 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 loud and clear.
now? Okay. So I think the in the two panels, it's clear that the reason why we are having this webinar is because our issues remains to be invisible. That there is a seeming disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what the government wanted to see and actually address, no, at the macroeconomic level. And what we have been saying from the start is how violence against women has been always been deprioritized by our government, and how it becomes not a part of the economic response. So we are actually in whether in the context of migrant workers or whether in the context of conflict experienced by ethnic minorities in Burma. And I think what we are saying right now is that our stories that we have gathered on the ground actually strengthen our claim that these stories are making women and girls' issues visible. And this is what we wanted our government to look into and consider when they respond and address the pandemic or the COVID-19 now and even after. So I think we had a very good discussion. And thank you for that. Thank you, Sir, and Judy. Thank you very much. And we're hoping that we would be able to come up with another set of discussion, a continuation of this discussion in our next webinar. So with that, um, Mirna, we will now proceed with the sharing of recommendations. So we will be asking all our panelists. We will be calling again our panelists from the first panel. We ask Usa, Rena, and Liz to just highlight your at least one recommendation, maybe to your government and to ASEAN. What do we want them to address in relation to addressing this pandemic at the regional level and at the national level? Can we start first with Usa?
Yes, thank you, Jalen. What the network of the women's organization and also the network of the um, vulnerable group of the people and also women discuss, we think that the government should integrate the issue on the mental health and also gender-based violence into the practical as practical guide for the health officers now, because the health officers focus on the response to the coronavirus, the pandemic, but actually they should integrate the safety of the women and the children and also people in the families into their work, and also when they visit the home or doing like a body checkup, the temperature, they should also observe what happened, and also widely at the national level deliver the information to the women and children who are now affected from violence that and encourage them to seek for help now. Yeah. Thank you. That this is like just a short recommendation, but that we seek from the government, and we want this to echo also at the ASEAN level. Thank you.
Yes, maybe the recommendation for the Indonesian government. So the policy and programs from the government should prioritize and must be targeted to marginalized women and girl children, including elderly women, single mother, pregnant and lactating women, sex worker, women IDPs, women in conflict area, women migrant, including undocumented, LGBT women, women victim of violence, and also women and girl children with disabilities. So the policy and program from the government should be considered based on the sex disaggregated data, the impact on COVID, the impact of COVID on women and girl children. So the government should have the data on it. And the recommendation for ASEAN, so I recommend the ASEAN to develop regional guideline on how to incorporate the gender and needs-based analysis into preparedness and response efforts to improve the effectiveness of program implementation to test COVID-19. So there should be a regional guideline how to do gender mainstreaming to the measures or efforts to handle the COVID-19 in ASEAN member countries.
So should be followed by Liz for your
Um,
recommendation. Maybe you can proceed, Liz, while we wait for Jelen.
yes, for our recommendations, maybe at the national level, to make our policies or guidelines in addressing violence against women and girls to be more friendly to the victims, more gender sensitive, because even before this crisis, this is still being pushed. So given that we are experiencing this crisis, it adds to the added, it's another layer, another challenge. So maybe the guidelines should be modified to address the challenges that on mobility, on transportation, for example, or the other specific needs of women and girls. Um, and maybe also the requirements needed, because there are requirements needed when we try to go to government agencies. At the ASEAN level, maybe we should also consider women and girls issues. We should not treat them as just issues that are merely social-cultural, but rather economic issues, which is why the three pillars in ASEAN uh, should also take on, not just lodging them in one pillar. That is why it's also important for businesses, for example, to tackle the issue.
Thank you, Liz. How about you, Judy?
Thank you, Mirna. So basically, both for the national and regional level, I think for the situation of migrant workers, so we need to advocate for the strengthening of the social protection policies for migrant workers, specifically in the area of improving health insurance for them due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And such social protection policies should be supportive of women migrant workers' financial capability, to afford such health insurances. I think that's all for Brunei at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Sir, it's your turn.
As Burma government at national level, that we want them to stop a war, stop fighting. This is the first priority that they need to do it, and also the planning and the strategy that they are trying to do to put the gender perspective and the feminist perspective to prevent and protect women and girls in the conflict, even the and conflict, and also even the post-conflict area. So this is national. We want government to do that, and that's the ICR 11. So that need to prioritize during this COVID-19 is any human rights violations to do any to take any action on that, or to push any government to stop any violations in ICR 11. So this is the recommendation that we would like to get.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think Gillen is already here. Gillen, she's not yet here. So what happened to my co-facilitator? She left me in the middle of the discussion. Okay. So thank you all for your shared recommendations. I think they are all good recommendations. But before we close our discussion,
Okay,
let us first.
uh,
Okay, so here's Jillian.
I thank you for all the recommendations. Now we will proceed with the we're about to close this webinar, and can we now post the can we show now, Shaira, our key highlights for today and the recommendations, the key I know that all of you have already come up with the recommendations, but we would just like to summarize a bit what has been already said for the past 2 hours by our panelists from the 5 countries. So we first maybe I'll read first, and then maybe I'll ask Mirna also to read some of the highlights. No, so number one is we wanted to support research that aims to surface the stories of marginalized women and girls. So we have been saying that there's a lack on gender and age disaggregated data, and the lack of gender lens and analysis. And this is something that we think are important to really come up with a policy that would respond to the needs of women and girls. Second is prioritize marginalized women and girls issues in crisis and after this crisis, which includes accessible and free integrated service for women and girl children victims of violence. Next slide. Mirna, would you like to read this slide?
Okay, for the third point, we should incorporate gender and needs-based analysis into preparedness and response efforts to improve the effectiveness of program implementation to address COVID-19 issues and even after COVID-19. I think this is true in all different times of crisis, no? And the last point is measures to protect and stimulate the economy from cash transfers to credits and loans must be targeted at women, including elderly women, single mothers, sex workers, women IDPs, women in conflict area, women migrant, including undocumented, LBT, and women victim of violence. So it's like saying that the government response to crisis should be gender transformative. Okay, back to you, Jillian.
And then these are the key recommendations. Next, can you proceed? Next slide, please. Number one, we've strongly go back, please, Shaira. The first slide. Okay, so uh, the number one is we wanted to integrate mental health in addressing health issues of women and girl children, even at the time of COVID. So we saw the importance, no, of addressing mental health. That mental health is actually equivalent to mental abuse. In a way, affects, no, the concerns of women, and some even leads to mental abuse, and therefore must be addressed by the government. Second, policy and programs from government should prioritize and must be Shaira, can you please go back? Is this okay? So these are the strong. Uh, okay, so we lost the slide.
Sorry.
Yes.
My connection. Um, Wait, I'll go back.
So while Shira is trying to look into the slides, I think basically what the main points of this discussion is um, we want our laws, policies, and responses to the problem and issues of women to question the existing structural inequalities. This pandemic actually exposed that the old formula of now is not fully working, and therefore that's why we need to address. I think we have already read this part. Shira, can you proceed with the next slide? This is similar to what we have read already. Okay, so one is we wanted to modify guidelines of government to accommodate um, the needs of the marginalized. And then at the ASEAN level, there's a need for ASEAN to consider women and girls issues as part not only part of the socio-cultural but economic issues, that they are interrelated and must be addressed. No? Next slide, please. Is there okay, Mirna, can you just read this part?
Okay, for the other recommendation, advocate for the strengthening of social protection policies, especially improving health insurance of women migrant workers. Then priority should be on stopping the conflicts, address the issues women and girls in conflict and post-conflict areas, and push governments against violating women and girls' human rights in Southeast Asia. So I think those are the recommendations.
I think yeah, I think that's the end,
Yeah,
no?
yeah.
So yeah, so with that, as I was saying, this pandemic actually, with the stories shared by Weave and by Project Women of Brunei, actually exposes how this pandemic actually exposed that the old formula of addressing women's issues and vow is not fully working. We need to strategize and need strategies that will question the norms, stigma, discrimination, and we need responses that will end inequalities and transform spaces for women. We want a gender transformative response. And when we say gender transformative response, we wanted a response that is inclusive, specific, and distinct, especially for marginalized, including those in conflict area, or as mentioned by our representative from Burma, and not gender blind or neutral. We also want our policies and responses to be pro-poor and not for profit oriented. Economic reforms or policies should not focus on the market and the economy, but should consider the stories and experiences that we shared in this webinar. And most of all, the response of government must not trample the rights of women in exercising our other rights. So, with that, thank you very much. Terima kasih, kapkun ka, and salamat. How do you say it in Burma? Okon? Is it Okon? Is it Okon? It's in Cambodia. How do you say it in Burma? Sorry, sir. How do you say thank you? Sir, microphone, please.
Jesu Timare.
Okay, so thank you very much, and Mirna.
Maraming salamat po.
Okay, thank you very much, and
Thank
hopefully
you.
we can
Thank
join.
you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you
Thank
very much.
you. Bye bye.